Welcome back to the Growth Clinic. We are excited to be able to do this event weekly to be able to keep everybody up to speed on anything and everything they need to know, marketing and growth. We focus a lot on strategy. We focus a lot on answering questions. And so as you have questions, just toss them in the chat. We want this to be really engaging. So be sure that if you have questions about what we're talking about, or if you're just like bored out of your mind and you're thinking about something else, toss that in the chat too, and we'll keep track of those and answer them in future episodes if this is if there's enough interest around that particular topic. If it's super specific, maybe shoot us an email and we'll try and answer for you anyway. So that being said, we had some interest last call up on tracking and attribution in a cookieless world. So the future of tracking and attribution after really the big iOS and privacy concerns and all that. So the first thing that I want to iterate, I know Jason and I are on the same page on this, is that cookies are not going away completely. They're not going away completely. They're not going away immediately. So we still have some time to soak up the third-party cookie goodness, to smell that beautiful digital baking, and so all the audience targeting, all the remarketing, and everything, do that now, and leverage that as much as possible until they take it away from us, and really. We are seeing the impact of iOS 14 and 15 and everything now. I had an experience when I was working at a previous agency. I was overseeing a Google Ads team. It's kind of a paid search director-esque role. And there was this client that I was like, man, he was kind of a personal acquaintance, a friend of a friend kind of guy. And I was like, I got to get on a call with this guy and tell him to stop paying us, because we were just like, performance was tanking. There was no way we could turn it around. I'd spent a ton of time going in and trying all these strategies. And I get on the phone with him and I was like, man, I'm so sorry. And he's like, why? Performance is great. Like, sales are coming in and it's awesome. I was just like, but Google Ads says that it's terrible, and analytics, while completely different for some reason, also says that it's not great. Like, where are you seeing this? And he's like, oh yeah, I use Hyros. It's like this like multi-channel attribution and tracking, platform. And I was like, okay, right. So I get login info and I go in and look, and he's making, more than his target return, and it's just not showing in Google Ads. So, it definitely, a lot of that was Facebook. Some of that was Google Ads. Some of that is people on Apple devices. Some of that is just, the nature of the systems being imperfect. But the point of that story is that I just want to iterate, while we are seeing some things in our tracking, in our analytics, in our data as being negatively impacted, if you continue to do the things that are right, that provide value to the customer, that generate sales, they will still come in even without cookies. We may have to adjust some of what we're doing, with targeting audiences, with retargeting. But it's not going to affect our ability to receive form submissions. At least now. There was a time Jason was telling me earlier. Well, I'll let you go ahead and share that, Jason, if you want to.
Well, the first thing I was going to say is that with iOS 14, I think the person that was the most nervous that I know of was our director of paid social, and he was like, "I'm losing all this data. What am I going to do?" I will say that I don't think he's been busier than he's been this month. So good to see that, yes, things change, strategies change, but if you are able to navigate that, there's definitely success still to be had. And yeah, I mean, I'm our director of marketing operations, so I live a lot and breathe a lot of the CRM level data. And that's the other part about cookies, is knowing that, first party cookies aren't going away. Like, we're still going to have first party data in general. And so there's still going to be a lot of marketing strategies we'd use now that will still be here years from now. And also, we're still going to have ways to count things. Like, it's not, if you think about what third-party cookies represent, and also what privacy and anonymity looks like, there's still gonna be ways to count like which pages get the most views, like where people are going, what content's performing. So yeah, some of those methods may change a little bit, but it's not that it's going to be the end of the world. I think that's the one thing that I would say. And there is going to be developments in technologies, and what is it, necessity is the mother of invention. Like, that's also going to be the case where we're going to have a lot of providers out there who rely on third-party cookies now that will find other methods to help support teams. I think about all of the data enrichment tools that exist now. Those are going to go away. They're going to figure out new methods to enrich data for people. And I think about some of the great work that G2 Crowd just came out with their latest list of top technology platforms. Well, G2 Crowd is a great example themselves in terms of how they partner with clients and provide company level data. One of the methods they do is actually how they track logins. And so they're able to see who's logging in to G2 Crowd and then where are they going. So those kinds of things where people are able to leverage first party data and still do partnerships with other companies is still going to be around too. So it's more of just saying, hey, there's change happening, there's change coming. Some of that changes now. I don't even know if everyone realizes that Google Analytics network domain was a great tool to do reverse IP research years ago, but that was gone in 2019, and we miss it, but I don't think anyone remembers it. So it's just, change is going to happen, but it's not going to be the end of the world, I think, is the theme.
Yeah, and I'll drop my 2 cents real quick. Is essentially I'm not worried about it for a couple of well, there's cookies, right, and there's iOS 14 plus, 2 different things, right? Cookies I'm not worried about because I have it on good authority that Google is basically behind the 8 ball. They kind of sort of don't, they keep pushing the dates back and back and back. They make a ton of money. They're not going to botch it, and they're not going to launch it without some kind of substitute, right? Or without some kind of workaround. So we'll have plenty of time. We'll be the first to learn about it because we'll be whatever on their blogs and such. So I'm not worried at all about losing cookies. On the iOS 14 plus side of Facebook, that is actually detrimental. We have some clients that were spending a lot of money on Facebook, but the most of the detriment is that it just won't show up. It's not, to Ryan's point, it's not necessarily that you're getting fewer conversions. It's just that they're coming in kind of unlabeled, and you don't really know, what that impact is. There's some mitigations and mediations for that, but of the 2 issues, I consider the iOS 14 plus issue to be more important, to triage in a way in the short term. But the reality of the situation is that the biggest thing being affected is the visibility of those conversions, more so than anything. I mean, there's definitely some limitations in targeting. If you had any custom audiences that had been built, those will be smaller, etc. But I think that it's almost much ado about nothing in some ways.
Yeah, I think that also some of the concern is in training algorithms because of that masking of data. It's going to be potentially more difficult. To your point, custom audiences, we're losing a lot of things that we have learned to use well. But again, to your point, I think there's going to be a lot of things that come out that are very innovative developments in finding a way around this privacy concern. And the main point for those just joining in, at the end of the day, whether you can see where the leads are coming from or not, doing the right things will still generate those leads. The difficulty, though, for your positions is that you have to report on the source of the leads, right? So how do we go about doing that? There are various ways that people are talking about, some people are talking about server-side client tagging. Some people are talking about local storage. There's always the classic UTMs that, a lot of people talk about, and some people just still don't leverage. anything and everything you can do. But one really, really simple tip that a lot of people just aren't doing, because they think of it as like simple or silly or something, is just put "how did you hear about us" in your conversion forms, but do it as a free field, a free text field, required, and don't suggest any ways of filling it out. Don't say like social or referrals in like the little like gray text, whatever. Just leave it completely blank. How did you hear about us? Heard a lot of stories about people putting those fields up. You can take something else out if you're worried about conversion rates, because it's another field, and but like they don't have to add a lot of information. Sometimes people put paragraphs of stuff in there. It's like it's an amazing source of qualitative data. So just give that a shot if you're worried about understanding, like, okay, where did this come from? How can I prove this is marketing sourced? And it's a way. It's not perfect, but couple that with UTMs. Kind of look into, have your super tech savvy IT people look into server side tagging and anything further like that.
Yeah, and that's by doing that, you'll also find some things you might not expect if you're just looking at your data, right? For example, your Google Analytics might say that person converted from organic search, which may be true on the last touch, but if that person writes in the field, "Oh, I heard about you at such and such trade show," well, now you know that was the touch that really influenced them, right? That there is salient in their mind, right? So as you start to collect that data, you can start to see not just which touch points are, getting people to that final conversion, but also get a better understanding of your whole marketing ecosystem and how it's contributing to influencing your prospects into becoming.
Yeah, I've seen, I love that, the self-selection. And I know that some of the people here on this call do use that currently, like the "how did you hear about us" field. But I've not seen, well, I really like the idea of open text field, but I would also experiment with maybe different ways to phrase it. Like, for instance, you might say, which ad did you, or, which ad brought you here today, for instance, if you wanted to be more specific about that, or about like the ads and the attribution. But at the end of the day, ads, platforms, Google search, all of these things are basically methods by which to get to you. So like whether somebody typed in your company's name into Google and clicked on the first link or went directly to your website is not nearly as important as like what actual substantive things are driving them to your site. So I love that, the self-selection with the free form, worded in a couple different ways. And if you're worried that adding another field to your form might reduce the conversion rates, you could always do it on a thank you page. I love making positive use of thank you pages. I think they're some of the most underutilized assets in general on the web, because that thank you page, when it or the confirmation message, whatever it is, that's the one moment in any web session where you can be pretty darn sure that you have that person's attention, right? Like they've just parted ways with their info, they've just clicked submit, they're waiting for something to happen to know what that next step is. So if your thank you pages are just like, "Hey, thanks, someone will be in touch," that's definitely a wasted opportunity. And you could use that to ask where they came from, or you could use that to progress the sale. Whatever your sales people need, whatever questions they need answered right off the bat, ask them right then and there. Upsell, cross-sell, sign up for my newsletter, whatever it is. But I would definitely be pretty specific about thank you pages moving into 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, and you mentioned adding fields. One of the things that we should do, and Ryan touched on this, is adding hidden fields to our forms if they're not there, right? Sometimes we just see that the fundamentals aren't being executed well with clients and prospects, and a lot of times that's one of our advantages, is being able to see that and fix that and show, oh yeah, well, here's the visibility you need. An example of that, like with when we talk about like a cookieless world, is capturing like Google's click ID and those kinds of things. So not just your UTM parameters, but like what is the ID, the identifier that Google's using to say, okay, this is where this came from. If you're capturing that, you can use that and have that transfer as your prospects go through the sales journey, and you can send that data back to ad platforms as well. It's a huge opportunity that we see quite often, that's not being done. And so sending that click ID, capturing it in a hidden field value, sending it back to, ads platform when someone turns into a meeting or an opportunity or a customer, that really enriches your targeting ways that you can't do on the front end anyways.
Right. Yeah, and definitely tie that in, to whatever CRM you're using. If I've seen people that were running a ton of ads, and it was one of their largest lead sources, and they didn't have the Gclit or the Google Click ID as a source in Salesforce. It was amazing to me. So they're like, how can we figure this out? So yeah, definitely leverage what you have now. Tuka asked a good question about how this is going to affect attribution, multi-touch attribution, et cetera. So Tuka, were you talking about like on ad platforms in Google Ads, for example, or?
So in general, where I work, what we do is, even though people click on the form and we know where they came in from, the call center again asks them, how did you hear about us? And then the lead source is changed. With that, we lose almost 50% of our leads to other sources that come to the website, right? So with that said, right now our attribution is it's not the best, but we're working on improving it. So with that said, what do you guys think?
Well, first off, stop your call center from doing that. You're the marketing experts, not them. But if you don't have control over that, I think in terms, well, I mean, that's going to break any attribution that's already there, right? Because if they're going in and changing it and their word is law versus yours that sets it initially, then Google has a lot of stories. So I was at a Google training at their headquarters in Chicago, and they told this story about talking about multi-touch attribution and talking about qualitative data and things like that. And they said that there was this company that was having a lot of trouble with their tracking and their attribution. And so they went in and they were on a call with one of their customers, their prospects or whatever. And they were like, how did you hear about us? And they said, oh, I heard you on a radio ad. And the attribution and analytics said that it was like organic search or something like that. And the company had never run radio ads. And so they tell that to basically pump Google's automated data, and attribution and everything, and kind of discount people. There will be, as humans, our memory is faulty. We can't remember every single touch. There's a really cool Darren Brown video that you could YouTube, search on YouTube about influencing the subconscious through subliminal messaging. Super, super fun. We don't register everything consciously because we'd go crazy. Our reticular activators only bring to our conscious mind, and creepy, yes, Catherine. It's our subconscious only brings to our conscious mind things that are relevant or important to us. And so until it is important to us, we don't consciously register. So anyway, sorry, don't get in the weeds on that. But the important thing is that it's never been a perfect science. The attribution, the tracking, multi-touch attribution is a better way of assigning attribution than single touch, but it's still only able to track what it's able to track. So it's not going to be able to track if somebody goes and talks to one of their friends and is like, oh, you've got to check out Window Nation, they're amazing. It's not going to be able to track, if somebody's listening on a podcast and then goes, that's going to be like organic search or direct. It's not
I was going to say, Ryan, one of the other parts of that with multi-touch attribution is that it's only as good as it's understood. I've had a lot of instances where we've had really complex attribution models that really fell flat because the stakeholders didn't quite understand, and sometimes that can happen too with just how these fields are populated. It may be just, Tuka, in your case, it could be just a conversation with the sales team saying, hey, like this is a field that's used for this specific purpose. Let's align on this. Another thing though, is that, we've seen this come up with some of our clients where, especially like HubSpot clients, HubSpot captures a field property history and you're able to actually export all of the people in your database and like the field history changes that have happened on specific fields. So in those, if you were to have that kind of scenario, you can actually export that and say, hey, yes, their most recent value says call center or something like that, but I can see that, you know, their field history was updated like 2 months ago, and there's actually this many people that we helped generate that went to the call center. So there's nooks and crannies like that that come up. Sometimes they're messy and not, you know, in a structured way, but there's usually like a way to kind of solve for that in some form or fashion. But a lot of times it starts with that alignment, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jason. Thank you. It's sales and marketing alignment is one of the trickier things. If sales is getting all the attribution, you know, internally for the revenue growth from what marketing is generating, you know, we all know it should be one company unified working toward growth, but it's not always the case because we're human and you know, we are faulty. But yeah, I think any alignment you can find around, you know, educating like how you are dealing with this and how you are viewing attribution, what sources you're seeing, and then, you know, maybe there's just a simple SOP change that can be made for the call center so that they can check it against or add to the existing source rather than completely updating it. Like, well, they said they saw you on the side of a bus, so like, here we go. You know?
Yeah, and I think one of the ways you can frame it is basically you're figuring out what are the success formulas for marketing, right? Like if we find that, you know, people are coming in and converting organically and then, you know, saying they've heard of us from a radio ad, if we find that that's one channel that's particularly profitable for us, right, that combination, then, you know, you can take that back to the executive team and say, hey, let's invest more dollars in this combination of activities, right? So you can like kind of bring these growth formulas, you know, up the chain, you know, if you're able to have that alignment and have that, you know, sort of sharing of data with the call center. So it's definitely a way to frame it as an opportunity for further growth.
Yeah, Jared, that's a really good point. Understanding the customer journey or the buyer journey is so key as we lose numbers, you know, because on one hand, you know, being data driven is awesome. You know, direct response marketing, scientific advertising has brought us to this amazing point of being able to do something and then see if it worked. You know, in more than just correlated number increases. But it has also kind of hobbled us. I think that's the word. Reading too much fantasy. It's kind of hurt us a little bit too in our ability to understand people and what affects them in a human way. You know, and the difficulty with this is that it's like, you know, really it comes down to the leadership and what they want to see and what they are telling us that they need. So, you know, we can't always just go to them and be like, yeah, but they're people and here's their journey that they go through. And if we go through these steps, like, you know, they'll hear us on radio, you know, and that will bring to mind this, and then they'll go and research, and then, you know, these steps, you know, if you can show them that with data, even if it's correlated, if you can map out a good story for them, it's a lot easier to understand for them. And maybe you can start to win them over more toward the idea of, hey, if we have these combinations of channels, it's not, you know, nothing occurs in a vacuum anymore. You know, the reason we have multi-touch attribution is because the customer journey is not, you know, they went from here and now they're here. You know, it's, well, they went here and now they're like back over here somewhere, but they also went over here. And it's a huge big mess full of a million different touches from different companies and different sources and different channels. And we can't track everything. So, you know, how do you attribute to all of those different points the value? And really, I think it comes down to understanding the customer journey and the questions they'll have along the way, what objections they'll have, and is there any surefire way to attribute, you know, value to one touch point along that way? I don't think so.
It's such a good point, Ryan, because I I think it's easy to over-index on the touch points we see in the data. One of my favorite things as like a marketing operations person is, it's fun to build out like lead scoring models and kind of figure that out and figure out what's, those indicators. But I remember the time a few years ago, I was actually like just hanging out at our company at a trade show, and I was able to go to it and just talking to some of the customers as they passed by and realizing how off I was with like their like demographic lead scoring and being like, well, you can't just assign values to people. You have to know who those people are too. And that context is important because it's easy to say, oh, this person's lead score is, 20, 58, that's great. Or 100, that's great. But if it doesn't have the context of those humans and actual human beings that exist behind those scores, then you're really going to fall flat in terms of really like being able to accelerate your sales and your advertising the way you want. Like that's, I think it's a really good point to not overreach there and to make sure that you are mindful that it's that there's more than just the data.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think one of the beautiful things about, or one of the upsides of a situation where we're losing data or becoming, having less ability to be quantitative is that, we can return to marketing principles, right? It's interesting. We had Larry Kim on our 3-Minute Marketing podcast, Web Mechanics. For those of you who don't know Larry Kim, he founded this company, WordStream, huge search marketing software, recently exited for a whole bunch of money. And one of the things he's very famous for is for talking about growth hacks. So he would go to Inbound and other conferences and talk about, hey, here are the 7 growth hacks for 2016 or something like that. And we asked him, well, what's your growth hack for 2021? And he said, ironically, the growth hack is going back to basics, building your brand, right? And the reason is because, especially in like the Wild West days of the internet, if you think about the 2000s to maybe the mid 2010s, the internet was very hackable, right? There were a lot of tactics you could use to, whether it be search engine optimization or really cheap clicks on different networks across the web to get an advantage and quickly grow, right? As the internet is maturing and evolving, and as the ecosystem is evolving, a lot of those hacks are kind of getting ironed out, which is bad in that we don't have as many ways to kind of cheat the system, right? And get a quick edge. But the advantage is that, if you, it gives us an opportunity to return to being really great at marketing and doing the things that actually, give value to customers. And over the long term, that allows us to, frankly, I think, build better companies that, do better work for our customers and, create a marketing that actually works to build the business and position the business well, right? So I think there are advantages, as we feel that we're losing the data or the quantitative aspects on one side, it allows us to turn to the fundamentals and think from first principles and, think in a way that could be more impactful over the long term for our companies.
Yep. If you guys have specific questions about your own scenarios, feel free to drop them in the chat. We would love to be able to help you out. One thing that's coming to mind now, there's 3 parties that really are affected by this. There's us, the marketers. I'm confident that we can figure it out because we didn't used to have any attribution really at all. So, it's like we went from 0 to 100 and now we're going back down to 50 or 75. I think we'll figure it out. There's the executives, right? The people whose budget it is. That is a difficult one to reconcile. And we should talk about how to solve for that and what sort of narratives to put forth for executive teams. I think that's really probably like one of the biggest reasons that marketers are worried about this. But the third is the ad platforms, Google ads, Facebook ads specifically. They don't necessarily care, but they're the ones with the most accurate view of reality, right? So attribution is just basically a narrative that we tell about what's happening in reality. It's never going to be precise. Our only hope is that it can be accurate. We'll solve for the executives maybe a little bit later in this convo, but Jason mentioned one thing about solving for the platforms. And that's what's really, really important. And that goes back to that Google Click ID or that Facebook Click ID that comes through attached to the URL. Now, what every advertiser does is a one-way communication where that URL parameter comes through. It goes into CRM, but then Google never hears back about it, right? So as far as Google's concerned, If you get 1,000 leads, they're all of the same quality. They don't really, they have no way to be able to tell. But of those 1,000 leads, once 100 of them convert to customers or do something else that's useful, that data should be taken and pumped back into Google Ads, because that magic little click ID basically tells Google everything that they need to know. It tells them who that person is, what the session details were, and Google and Facebook both just have massive amounts of data. So really the most important thing to solve for attribution in terms of performance is letting Google and Facebook know which clicks turned into success.
Yeah, 100%. If you can even, you want to talk about feeding algorithms for attribution, if you can go in and add like, okay, which of these clicks turned into, MQLs, which of these turned into, marketing qualified opportunities or sales qualified opportunities, and then tie values to those, so that you can tell Google like, hey, this was really valuable. This was really valuable. And hey, we closed this deal for, 30K or whatever, like that is going to feed the algorithm a lot more useful information so that you don't end up losing all of that valuable data.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
I was just gonna add the other part of that is, I think, extremely valuable is that it's really agnostic to what kind of company you have.
Yep.
If you're running, ads on any ad platform, you get to decide what's important and what's sent back. It doesn't have to be an MQL or an SQL. You don't even have to have MQLs or SQLs. You get to decide what is important and relay that back to these ad platforms. Ad platforms have a huge appetite. Google has, like Chris said, Google has a ton of data, for example. They have a huge appetite for data as well. So we could decide what of those conversions we think are important. What are those steps in the sales process or the customer journey that we're sending back for whatever company? And that's any industry. And so that's one of the more valuable things about that tactic.
Yeah, one thing that's important is, if this isn't set up yet in your ad platforms, to start as quickly as possible, because it takes time for the data to actually aggregate. And, it's also, multiplicative, right? As you start to build data, and as Google and as Facebook, these platforms start to learn, what your ideal customer looks like, what your ideal outcome looks like, the more and more data you feed it, the better and better it gets, right? It's machine learning algorithm. So, the sooner you start, the sooner you can have that you build that sort of groundswell data for Google or Facebook to actually learn and optimize for your business result, not just superficial clicks or form fills or other marketing metrics. The other thing is once you have this in place, it becomes a competitive advantage for your business, right? Because, if all your other competitors are just working in platform and bidding for clicks or bidding for conversions, and not feeding this data back and not training the algorithms, you're now way further ahead of them in terms of, having systems that are actually building your business, through these ad channels. So, the sooner you can get this set up, the sooner you not only can have this data start working on your behalf, but the further ahead you're going to be of your competitors in the race to get into this new kind of paradigm.
Yeah, it also addresses Chris's number 2 question about, executive stakeholders, because it's a lot better narrative to say, hey, I'm able to prove that we're, generating this revenue and tying it to revenue as opposed to just a click or just a conversion.
Yeah, super important. So that's, at the end of the day, that's all they care about, right? We like to see all of the numbers go up, but like if we see MQLs go down, but revenue's going up, it's like, well, hey, sales gets, higher quality leads and, we get revenue and everybody's happy. Now, how do we do more of this?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Chris, did you have any other thoughts on how to kind of better work with the executives and kind of, diffuse that problem, that they're experiencing?
No, not really. I don't. I'm hoping we can work through that together, but I have a pretty good start to it, which I've been using already, is basically to start off by saying, hey, look, the entire marketing world is struggling with this right now. There is no silver bullet solution, right? Like just those 2 things, and the execs' minds are just like, okay, well, then this is something that we have to deal with. So at least you're letting them know that, hey, this isn't just us that's going through this. there, there is no silver bullet solution, but the rest of it can vary quite widely. I mean, there's executives that are in the weeds and in the know and will understand quickly and work with you to adjust. And there's executives that are not and just want, the leads and the numbers, which will be more challenging.
Yeah, no, I really, really like that though. I think a lot of times, I'm kind of a hobby behavioral analyst, and it's not, you can't generalize with anything, but a lot of times, somebody in an executive position is going to be much more of a dominant personality, much more assertive and task oriented and result oriented, and they just want, give it to me straight, give me the results. And so if you can come to them and just be like, there's no silver bullet, everything's going to crap, but then you can provide the solution.
The good news is, we are informing Google and Facebook of the truth via those, via passing back those click IDs back and forth to CRM. So, regardless of what the actual numbers say, that there is indeed optimization and improvement taking place. But other than that, it is a tough conversation depending on the execs.
Yeah. It goes back to Ryan's point though about telling the narrative too though. I think that it's not so much, you're gonna have execs that just want the data, you're right. But a lot of times they're in a hurry. They don't have time to go through all the little minutia of the data. So if you're able to craft that narrative of what that journey is and be able to explain that, that's probably going to resonate a lot more too, in terms of explaining what we're trying to achieve and how it's being done. And I think it's in terms of saying, hey, like we're enriching what Google's doing so that they can do targeting and leverage their intelligence. A lot of execs will understand that concept. It's gonna be different from exec to exec from person to person. But Ryan, your point about just the narrative and emphasis on that is such an important part.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's Avanish Kaushik, kind of the authors the Occam's Razor blog, which is a super meaty blog if you're ever into like analytics and whatnot. But he said that this really goes to reporting, which is kind of what we're talking about here. If you're reporting to execs, the more you can take those numbers and turn them into stories, the better you'll be able to communicate with clients, with leaders, with anybody. And so it really at this point it's a good transition for those of us that haven't been able to do that, that have been sending just like large numbers, it's like the Matrix, so like, here, I figure this out.
Zeros and ones.
Exactly. I wrote this report in binary. So we want to take those, deeper numbers and report on like top level metrics or drill it down to as simple as you can make it. And then, include the story. Just like, here's what we're seeing from this, or here's how people are converting. Here's what we've learned about our customers' journey. And here's where we see more ability to influence. Because if we know the customer journey and we can see the numbers and kind of, align the two, then we know like, okay, if we're not experiencing growth, we can look at the journey and see where the choke points are between touch points. And okay, so, we're not seeing as many leads as we want, or lower quality leads, but the problem is actually higher up in the funnel or earlier in the journey. And so to Larry Kim's point, like brand building, like let's focus on getting in front of our target customer base with a story about who we are and how their world will be with us, and what our values are, and let's identify this subset of the market that we can really drill down into and resonate with, and then expand from there. But let's find what channels they're on and what questions they're asking, and just how can we build this relationship with them that's going to pay dividends in the future, because we've got to get sales now, we've got to get leads now. But we can't do that at the expense of leads in the future.
Yeah, there's a lot of chatter about this on LinkedIn right now about how you budget for brand or like top of funnel activities versus what you might call demand capture, basically short-term, pipeline generation. And, I've heard numbers like 70, 30, 20, 80 towards, short-term, long-term. But think about it in terms of like, you've got two buckets. You've got like, how do I show results in the short term, keep my executives happy while I'm building the longer term thing over here that's really going to pay dividends, right? That's really going to create that sort of exponential curve. So if you can tell that story of like, hey, here's what we're doing in the short term, Mr. Executive, that's, showing, meetings or sales or whatever that metric is you're reporting on, and we're also building this thing over here that's going to be like a stock that's going to go up and to the right in 1, 2, 3 years. Then, you kind of create that whole narrative about, the executive feels safe because now like there's efforts in the short term to like keep the numbers humming, where in the long term, there's this much bigger opportunity that's being built towards, and that makes them excited for the future.
You said the magic word with stocks. That was what I was going to say. And that's also going back to that narrative, right?
Yeah.
Most execs are going to understand stock portfolios, and that you don't always have the most aggressive. You have ways to hedge your bets. And I think that understanding your narrative around like your net new or lead gen or top of funnel kinds of campaigns and brand marketing campaigns really can play into that narrative and saying, hey, like we need to invest now. Yes, we need to like do our demo advertising and get like form submissions for like demo requests and meetings now, but we also need to lay the groundwork for next year and beyond, so that we can have sustainable growth and have some stability with our pipeline, so it's not so fluctuating from like week to week based upon what our ad performance was last week. So I think that would ring true a lot and for a lot of different stakeholders.
Yeah, no, I think another along these lines, I think an idea to potentially work with execs is ask if you can perform a test. Look at your existing conversion rates, your close rates, and kind of like you're measuring lead quality, and then take some brand building exercises that are maybe kind of middle of funnel or mid journey, whatever you're helping push people over the line. They're going to be ready to buy soon, but they're not ready now, and start doing some work focusing on them. And then like 3 to 6 months later, look at those same metrics that you looked at, and see if there's correlated lift in close rates, from sales. See if there's correlated increases in conversion rate. Again, attribution and tracking is not a perfect science. There's a lot that we can track, and we should track everything that we can. But sometimes good old-fashioned scientific testing is the way to go. And if you can present a good case for the time invested into the long-term gains, you're going to see a lot more growth over time, rather than just feeling like you're continually scrambling for the short-term wins now.
Yeah, so I'm conscientious of time here. I'm excited to see a lot of familiar faces and repeats here. I'm hoping that you guys are the beginning of our little community that we're building. And I want to make sure that this is as valuable as possible for you guys. So I'm interested to hear some more questions. This topic was nominated, I think, by more than one person in this same group that we're in. So I'm interested if you can drop it in the chat, just like, what are you guys, what issues are you facing currently with regard to the cookieless future or attribution? Is it just kind of fear of the unknown? Do you have your executives breathing down your back? Are your attribution reports already changing dramatically for some reason and you don't know why? Like, what are the issues that you're dealing with today? Or is it more so just kind of this like, what does this mean and what's going to happen, and just general anxiety toward it?
I just want to bring something up real quick. It's easier for me just to say it than chat it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Earlier, you all were making some recommendations around adding the field to our forms, which I think that's a really good idea. And then making sure we're utilizing the UTM codes. And then you said something, someone said something about including our IT teams and having them do some research, and I didn't catch. Does someone remember that?
Yeah, probably not the right team, but basically, if you've got anybody in tracking and analytics, you want to potentially look into server-side tagging, or just do some digging there. I'm not an expert in it myself, or I'd go into a lot more details, but I leave that to my betters.
We do have we have a new team, a business intelligence team, so I think we can talk to them about that. Thank you.
Yeah, and server side, I would suggest looking into, especially if you're spending a lot on Facebook ads. Server side usually is a means by which to like reduce the load speeds, like reducing the load burden on the client side, and instead like processing all the information on the server side. It can be useful in general, like it'll speed your site up, but it is one of the main ways to mitigate the iOS 14 plus issue on Facebook ads. But one thing that I always like to do, let's see. Yep. So in general, and Jason, you can feel free to chime in on this, but I always like, well, you definitely want to keep UTMs. Like you want to use UTMs, use them well, make it part of your process. I like to parse the URL of a visitor the first time they visit and store it in a first party cookie locally, right? And then parse subsequent visits, like if they visit again with the UTM parameter or whatever the next URL, the last URLs they visit, parse that as well. So within Salesforce, you'll create two fields. One is basically like first URL, one is second URL. And when they come back and convert eventually, both of those URLs should be passed through. So at least now you know, okay, here's the UTMs associated with the first one. Here's the last visit. And then whenever they do convert, make sure to push the click ID as well as well. I think those steps in and of themselves, and of course there's the last step of once they do the thing. So in a high volume situation where you have a lot of deals closing, it might be once that deal has closed, then you want to push that data back to the platforms. But in a lower volume situation where you may only have one or two deals closing a month or what have you, you want that critical action that you're passing back to be higher up in the funnel so that you can get enough quantity so that the robots can actually learn.
Yeah, and Chris, you make a good point about first-party cookies too, right? When we talk about a cookieless future, the big emphasis in the near term, and even that's still TBD if it's near term or long term, because Google's still, like Chris said, behind the eight ball on there, is a lot of like third-party cookies would likely be ineffective. And honestly, right now, a lot of browsers don't even load third-party cookies, right? So that's already happening right now. And what we're talking about is like if you have a separate technology you're licensing and they have like a tracking script that you put on your page, like those are the kinds of things that'll be more ineffective in the future. However, your own data, which you're documenting from like your website visits, will still be a tactic that you can explore and leverage, like Chris describes, which is really important to keep in mind. How that takes form or shape for you may differ. You may have someone who is a wizard and knows how to set first-party cookies. You may need help for that, but it's a capability to keep in mind as we look towards the future. The other part of that is once you have that data captured, how does it travel around your database? And I see this a lot as a common pain point is that, well, let's say we have, a Salesforce setup, right? Which is quite common for a lot of our clients and folks we know, where you have like, the leads object, but then you have opportunities on this separate record type. And a lot of times that Google Click ID or the Microsoft Click ID, if you're running Bing ads even, Facebook Click ID if you're running Facebook, a lot of times that gets stuck in terms of the data process. And people think, oh, well, the customer journey goes from, leads created to a meeting scheduled to an opportunities created, but they're not thinking through how that data is being translated from those different record types in their CRM. And that's really important, especially if you're trying to send that data back. Like if you want to know or send an ad platform information about when an op's created or like when a deal is won. Well, you need that click ID on those deal records or on those opportunity records to be able to represent that. So sometimes a lot of it's just knowing where your data is flowing now and where those roadblocks might be, because there's going to be ways to solve for that.
Yep. So you'll create a new field called like click ID on the lead record.
Yeah.
But if you're using Salesforce in such a way where you're converting leads into deals or opportunities,
Mhm.
unless you create that same click ID field on the opportunity record and specify for Salesforce to pass the one through to the other, you'll lose it. So that is very important.
Yep. Essential data plumbing.
Now, if this seems ambiguous or a little confusing, the core, so this can be automated in a large way, but if you were to do it manually, you could do it manually. Let's say you spend on ads and you get 1,000 leads. So you're looking at a spreadsheet with 1,000 leads on it, first name, last name, email, whatever it is, and you'll also get click ID in that spreadsheet. You upload that to your CRM. Your salespeople do what they do. Of those 1,000 leads, 100 of them become deals, right? So now what you do is you export those 100 deals with the same thing, first name, last name, email, but just make sure you have that click ID, which will be the same click ID that appeared on the first spreadsheet, and take that spreadsheet of the 100 deals and upload that into Google or Facebook. Like that's really the essence of what we're doing. And there's ways to automate it so that it could take place hourly or daily or whatever. But at the very least, you can go old school with it and literally just upload the files, every 5, 10, 15, 20 days.
Yep. So that, I think, is a good point to put a bow on this conversation. We've got about 5.5 minutes left. So we handle the attribution and tracking by request. Would be super open to a requested topic for next week as well. We want to be able to specifically speak to the challenges that you're dealing with in your everyday work. If you can talk about anything related to marketing and growth, what could we speak to that would be the most valuable for you?
Yeah, feel free to drop it in the chat, or feel free to email me directly. I'll drop my email in the chat, and we're very open to comment. Any comments or feedback or questions you have, and ultimately we want this to be as useful for you guys as possible, so that you guys can go and kick more butt in your marketing roles in 2022. So yeah, definitely shoot over any topics you'd like us to cover, and we will put it into the queue.
Yep, well, definitely. So
yeah, and if you guys need help, like if you encounter a very sticky situation, of course we can, we offer services. We also offer a coaching type of arrangement where it's more so just like, hey, we're gonna be there with you in the trenches, keep you motivated, keep you accountable, and so on and so forth. And since you guys are in our nascent little community already, we want to take good care of you and make sure that you are set up for success. Question randomly, something just popped into my mind. Would you guys like a Slack channel for this? Like, would it be useful if there was a Slack channel where you guys could drop, either topic ideas for next time and or questions and collaborate just with each other?
I like it.
And us. You like it?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Nice.
All right.
I like it too.
Yeah, let's toss one of those together and get some invites sent out. And that way, if anybody's got particular expertise, Tuka, go ahead and invite some people if this is valuable for you, and if you know some other people that want kind of some of that free, up to date, marketing stuff from the experts. We'd love to help more people. So, and that goes for anybody. So yeah, share topics, share it with people. We are uploading recordings of this to YouTube as well, and then we can send those out via email But yeah, we'll get that Slack channel going as well. And then if anybody in the group has particular expertise or challenges, toss that out. And if we specifically aren't able to help, maybe somebody else in the group will. Yeah, love to just be able to provide as much value to this group as possible. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We will be back next week, same time, on the Internet Machine. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all again next week.
Thank you, guys.